Hello, my name is Camille Proctor. I'm the founder and executive director of the Color of Autism Foundation. In 2008, my son Ari was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. I was both happy and I was frightened. I was frightened because I didn't know how I would support a person who had autism spectrum disorder, or at least that's what I thought. I was happy because after taking him to many doctors, he finally had a diagnosis. So that should have been a sigh of relief for me. But it wasn't, because I didn't have a place. I didn't have any supports. And when I went to support groups, no one looked like me and no one understood the unique things that a Black child is born into, such as racism, and systemic racism at that. So when I would ask questions about my son's future as a non-speaker at that time, I would say things like, hey, what's going to happen when my son's 12 and if he gets away from me, because currently he's an eloper, if he gets away from me and he can't identify who he is, he may get hurt. Or if he's approached by the police, if he doesn't understand how to yield, he may get hurt. And getting hurt would be a good thing as opposed to the latter of getting killed. No one understood that. And that made me fall more and more into isolation. On top of the fact that in my community, there had never been a big effort in regards to autism awareness or even autism acceptance. So it was very little known about a Black person who was autistic. And so oftentimes I would get remarks like, oh, he just needs a punishment, or they just made that up, or autism is something that only white people get. So in 2009, after a year or so of hearing all of this misinformation, feeling isolated and without support, as well as having to walk away from a six-figure job because no one would take care of a child that cried and could not speak. So in 2009, I decided to found the Color of Autism Foundation. And I decided to do this to end the stigma of autism, or what people thought autism was, right? I set out to demystify everything we thought we knew and to inform my community on the importance of autism acceptance, autism awareness, and the importance of early intervention. So originally in 2009, when I started the Color of Autism Foundation, I just basically wanted people to get their children diagnosed. I didn't want them to wait. And in 2009, Black children on average were getting diagnosed 4 years after their white counterparts. So imagine, white children were being diagnosed at 18 months and 24 months, and Black children were getting diagnosed on average between 4 and 6 years old. So I knew that was a huge disparity. Even worse, Black parents at a high alarming rate were being told that their children, especially their boys, had oppositional defiance disorder, not autism. And that particular label, when you give it to a Black child, is a fast track to the prison system, because that's effectively saying that child just is a bad child. And so there was many misdiagnoses within the Black community, and this was making access to care the wait even longer. So something had to be done. So what we do at the Color of Autism is that we found that information is the most vital part of a parent's existence and the most vital part of a parent being able to support their loved one on the autism spectrum. So we created a 5-week quarterly training where we teach parents, and we call it a training, but it's more like parent sessions. It's where parents can come in and meet facilitators and practitioners that look like them. Why is that important? Well, when you see someone from your community that is a specialist in these various therapeutics, you tend to listen. You also tend to be a little more open about your line of questioning. So we give these parents an opportunity over the 5 weeks to get to know a Black speech and language pathologist, a Black developmental pediatrician, a Black occupational therapist. These things are very important because it gives the parents an opportunity to ask the right questions. We also teach the parents about how to be data collectors. Now, I bet you're wondering, why would that be important? Well, it's important if you have a child that has a certain behavior that you need to get to the bottom of. For example, autistics frequently stem. There's good stems and there's bad stems. Typically, a bad stem would be that one that would be self-injurious. So, for example, if you have a child that hits his or her head against a wall, in my opinion, that would be considered a bad stem because that could be harmful to them. So we want parents to take note of when these behaviors are heightened. What are the triggers? Why are they doing this? Because if you're able to figure out what leads to this, you can minimize or stop it. Replace it with something healthy for them. You know, we encourage people to embrace, especially we encourage our caregivers to embrace who their children are, because we want autistics to have a real community, because this is important. It's important for autistic people to have their families be who they're supposed to be, their biggest allies, their biggest cheerleaders, and their biggest advocates. Because if an autistic person knows how valued they are by their family, they will know how valuable they are to the community, which is my next point. We need to be able to create a community where all autistic people thrive. On average, across this country, in underserved communities, especially in Black communities, there are no pathways to efficacy. What is efficacy? Thriving. So we need to create pathways such as job training and vocational skills, as well as social skills. They aren't present in these communities. So we need to get together and create them for this community. While we focus on supporting Black and minority population, at the end of the day, it's a community. And we need to create equitable futures for all persons who are autistic. Everyone needs an opportunity. Everyone needs an opportunity to thrive and be great. And so when we say this, we want parents and caregivers to take a careful look at their child and think about what they can be as opposed to what they aren't to them. Because oftentimes we as parents, we project onto our kids, but we never think to ask the children, what would you like to be? Or how do you feel? And so we talk a lot about the feelings of the person who is in our care. How do they feel? It's important. And I think that it's important as we build a community of strong advocates that we understand that we have individuals that have lower supports needs and those who have greater supports needs. So for example, you know, there's terms like high functioning that we don't really use anymore because honestly, no autistic is high functioning. Being able to talk and mask through life isn't necessarily high functioning because there's an awful amount of stress that goes along with masking. So we look at it this way. Who better to advocate than a person with lived experience? Think about it. You are an autistic person, so you understand the myriad of things that could be going through someone else who's autistic. And what I mean by that is that parents should figure out a way to communicate and bridge the allyship that autistics are offering us. I will say the best thing that I ever could have done for myself was befriend autistics. And when I say befriend autistics, I don't mean it to sound like a fad. I mean, I have autistic friends. But it wasn't until I had autistic friends and they were able to talk about their lived experience and how they felt that I gained better insights about my son. And I think that this should be normal. It should be normal to have autistic friends. It's not a fad, it's a thing. And actually, I think more people than not have autistic friends. We just don't know it yet, or you haven't been made aware. But it's important to have these autistic people in these spaces so they can help you advocate for the services and supports that you need. Having someone that's a non-speaker that may not be able to process or communicate, and communicate is not just speaking, communicate is other methods. But we have to be honest, there are people who cannot communicate, which is not tied to speaking. And so we have to be able to equip them with the ability to advocate for themselves. Yes, advocate for themselves, as well as support their family member who's supporting them. Because they rely heavily on that family member, and there's a lot of isolation attributed for both. And we need to lessen that. And the only way we can do it is to in allyship with those with lived experience. So my hope for the future for my organization is that we build a community where everyone has equitable futures and everyone can thrive. I want to make sure that our community, the Black community, and every autistic community focuses on efficacy and the thriving of its citizens. And its citizens are autistic. They are. So we should be making sure that we're taking care of everyone. Everyone. We need to create inroads to job skills within all communities. We need to make sure that there's adequate accommodations in every workforce, and someone who's going to be the watchdog to make sure that these individuals who are autistic are getting their work accommodation needs met so they can be successful. We need to make sure that every school district has in their employ people who can care for the autistic community properly. We need to make sure that there's fair and adequate housing for those who are autistic and neurodivergent. It's up to us to create the equity we want to see. We can't do it if we're siloed. And this is why I'm inviting everyone to join us as we create inroads to efficacy for all.